The following program does not necessarily represent the views and opinions of Reality Radio 101, its advertisers and sponsors, or its listening audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with psychologist, author, and speaker, Dr. Anna Baranowski, where mind, mood, and what matters to you are discussed. We're broadcasting live from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, on Reality Radio 101. Our email address is instudio101@gmail.com. So get ready to talk and email, post a message. We are looking forward to speaking with you and responding to your questions. And now, right to your host of the Bear Psychology Radio Show, Dr. Anna Baranowski.
Hi everyone, I hope you are all doing well today. Whether you're still sheltering in place or you're in the workforce or you're facing some things that maybe you didn't expect to face, I hope you're finding strength in it inside and courage to face all these strange times, and they really are strange. What I've been hearing a lot of in my clinic from a lot of people is that they've been really, because we're spending more time on our own, in our own homes, not distracted by the day-to-day things of our lives, is that some kind of inner stuff is bubbling to the surface. You're spending more time maybe with family members and they're pointing out your faults, or maybe you're seeing things in yourself that you don't really like that much. And that is really the topic of today's meeting, which is the shadow and our unconscious mind. And, you know, a lot of this came from Carl Jung's work of many years ago. So I'm going to reference him quite a bit because his work is actually quite astonishing when it comes to facing that which we do not want to show in the light of day. Usually the things that, when we get ignited or triggered or annoyed or irritated or frustrated by something that we're encountering in our world, maybe something somebody's doing or saying or displaying, we may get really annoyed when, if we just paid attention a little bit, we might recognize it actually as something within ourselves that we haven't fully integrated, or, maybe some element that we don't fully understand or know how to come to terms with about ourselves. And, when we're not fully integrated, we often spend a lot of our energy trying to suppress certain tendencies or, not really allow ourselves to, fully be who we are. And that can really steal from us a sense of well-being in our everyday lives. Now, just to be clear, this thing that I'm calling the shadow, it's not so easy to find. It can be a little bit slippery. We can look over our right or our left shoulder, and it's not just obviously there. We may actually find that it's not straightforward at all. And a lot of the elements of our shadow come from a time when we were quite young, and we developed these defense mechanisms to kind of cover or hide things from ourselves that maybe we didn't want to see, or that if they did come to the surface, made our lives trickier or more dangerous. So we learned strategies for covering them up. So for example, if we grew up in a home where, you know, the arts were like a waste of time and, you know, not to be indulged in, and, you know, silly and frivolous or whatever, we may really despise that aspect of ourselves, you know, a creative, artistic side of ourselves, when in fact it might be a very strong part of our lives, of how we're shaped, authentically shaped, intrinsically shaped as people. And, you know, instead of letting that come to the surface, we may look at it as something that, you know, we look down at, oh, lazy, you know, waste of time. I do not believe that personally. I think that the world of art is something to be revered and appreciated, and I'm always in awe of the work that artists can do in expressing the world around them, and giving us beauty in ways that we surely need, especially today. So I really kind of want to spend time thinking about how shadow impacts us as human beings, and what maybe you've seen in others in terms of shadow. Maybe you've interacted with somebody and they've become very agitated or reactive over something you said or did, and you couldn't wrap your mind around why that might have been. And you may have just stepped into their shadow. And sometimes when we step into another person's shadow, we can see how ignited another person can be. And it might be something as simple as, you know, like, you're kind of messy. You think you can like clean up after yourself, and now you've done it. This is something that this person doesn't want to admit about themselves or feels very insecure about, but you've seen it, and you pointed it out, and now there's going to be some kind of war as a result of it. So yes, I am Dr. Anna Baranowski, bearing witness to evolving mind, mood, health. I would love to hear from you today about this whole issue of the shadow and what it means, and enjoy taking your emails throughout at instudio101@gmail.com. And let's just start by recognizing that we are much more than what we present on the surface. And yet we all guard very carefully our own inner world, especially if we have insecurities that we don't want others to see. But really, why would that be? After all, it's just us that we're hiding. It's our true nature. So what are we really guarding, and why would that actually happen? And you know, what occurs when the facade, you know, that mask that we put on every day to face the world, what happens when it breaks down? And not only do we see our weaknesses, our insecurities, our strong drives, our deep emotions, but others will start to see them as well. What happens when these drives start to push towards the surface? Maybe in dreams or nightmares, maybe in reactions to something people in our lives are saying. You know, what happens? What if we see something in others that we actually despise in ourselves? Have you ever had that experience when, you know, you kind of say, oh, somebody, my neighbor, let's say, is so loud, you know, they're always making noise, and, you know, they're always complaining about something. And here we are complaining about something and making a lot of noise about it. You know, what we want to just look at is how strong are our own feelings and reactions. And Carl Jung says the most terrifying thing to accept is to accept yourself fully. Like, why would that be? Like, I know that, you know, we've all had moments in life where, you know, we can kind of have a strong feeling inside of ourselves and be very rejecting of that feeling. Now, if you take a moment and you just contemplate, what's that? What is the thing that you are actually rejecting? Like, what is it that is going on? By the way, if you're hearing things in the background, it's my dog. He's making himself comfortable on the floor beside me, and he's a very large dog. So when he gets up and when he gets down, you could really hear him. Here's my 120-pound dog who is just snuggling up. I want to read something from one of our listeners, Katie. Thank you so much, Katie, for emailing in. She says, this is a very interesting topic today. So many people have this so-called shadow in their present or past lives. And Katie is listening from Bangor, Maine. Well, welcome to the show, Katie. Yeah, now, this is an interesting comment, because the so-called shadow, and yeah, I agree. Actually, it is a so-called shadow, because what exactly is this thing? Because it's not an actual physical thing. It is qualities and an essence, characteristics. It's not an actual thing that we could put our fingers on. As a matter of fact, it's like, if you try to put your finger on it, it will wiggle away from you. So if you're trying to understand what your own shadow is, just be prepared that it might not be the first thing that you think it is. It might be something that is a lot more complex than something that you think you see on the surface. From a psychological point of view, the shadow is actually a part of your personality. It's an unconscious part. And if you don't allow yourself to recognize or admit certain things about your own personality, that's the piece that is your shadow. So, you would be looking at others and saying, oh, I'm not like that. I'm not messy. I'm not disorganized. I am smart. I am kind. I am whatever you think you are or you should be. And yet, probably all of us have days where we're lazy and disorganized and lying on the couch and, not pulled together. And that's okay, because that is a piece of our life. And in fact, it's a useful piece of our life, because if you think about it, if we're always drilling forward, forcing ourselves to do the next thing and conquer the next thing, it's like, what are we doing really? Like, there's no opportunity for quiet, and that is part of life. So we just have to, I'm not suggesting that you should be one way or the other. I'm just suggesting that when you find something in your life that you think you despise, there is usually some element of it that is exceptionally useful and important as well. Like, let's go back to the lazy idea. So a couple of days ago, I am into exercise. I believe in it. It makes me feel good. I have been incorporating it into my life for a long, long time. And I do different things, and I find it to be just a really good part of my life, and I like sharing it with other people as well. But there are days where it's like, my body is telling me, you just better not do anything, like just rest. And I think that's a really smart part, a part that helps me to understand, in fact, that going slow and doing less gives my body a chance to repair. And then when I get back into the things that I really love, I'm doing it because I love it, not because I am so driven and relentless and unforgiving, because that doesn't serve. It doesn't give my body time to heal and repair. And also, I won't enjoy all these activities that I like so much, because I'll be wearing down my body and, really just being relentless with it. And then you just drain all the fun out of something. So, if I look at somebody and I say, oh, they're really lazy, lying there on the couch, eating chips, that's ridiculous. When in fact, that's something I would probably do when I need a break. And that there is a really important aspect of it. It's this all or nothing thing that happens when there's something in the shadow. It becomes very rigid and demanding. It's not accepting of lying on the couch even when you're feeling really tired and you need that little break. So that's more of an accurate access to shadow, that it's very, very unforgiving of an aspect. So it's an all or nothing kind of thing. So, the shadow, whatever it might be in your case, may be perceived as positive by some and negative by others. And integrating this thing, whatever it is for you. And I really love to hear from the listeners, what kinds of things you think is in the shadow, or how you struggle with it, or whether you see it come to the surface and how it might come to the surface. You may be really noticing it now, particularly if you are sheltering in place still with COVID-19, or you are sheltering in place with family members, or somebody who is in your pod. A friend of mine just told me that term pod, when people have certain people in their lives that are part of their kind of inner circle, who they are not even necessarily in intimate relationships with, not necessarily a spouse, but somebody who they have shared that space with during this time, so that they know who their safe people are. So integrating this, whatever it is, we'll notice it often in the people who are closest to us, especially in a time when we are really not seeing a lot of others. So we become very familiar with both things that annoy us in ourselves and things that annoy us in others. So when we start to look at those things, let's say laziness again, and start to recognize it as actually a beneficial part, for example, then we may no longer have to do inner battle with trying to suppress this idea of laziness, but actually embrace the moments when we are tired and need to rest. Otherwise, we may just battle it. So we want to, not go into terrible battle with ourselves constantly, because it really is, it steals from us in ways that are, truly depleting and very hard to deal with. So we've got another email, and this is from Larry. Hi, Larry. So Larry is asking, is shadowing actually a good or bad thing? Well, it's not, it's the shadow. So the shadow is that part of ourselves that we, it's an unconscious part. And in fact, it is a really, really important part, because it serves a purpose. There are elements of our behavior that we really needed to kind of manage and learn about when we were children. And our inner shadow, our unconscious parts usually come into play as young children when we're trying to deal with maybe a chaotic world, or a reality that isn't straightforward, some complexities, maybe dangers, or maybe a well-meaning family that, like I was talking before about art, maybe just a well-meaning family that wanted the kid to work really, really hard and put their best foot forward, and, not waste time on creative pursuits, but instead, study certain kinds of things that the family thought were more important. And so maybe as a child that would have given, their parents some happiness if they became an accountant, let's say. Nothing wrong with accountants. It's perfectly reasonable field of study, and, one that takes a lot of focus and attention. So, it's an important skill, but maybe that's not the kid's main skill. Maybe that individual would have been an incredible performing artist, maybe an inspired singer, a musician, dancer, composer. But the family really wanted that child to have a very practical career, and so they learned how to suppress the other parts of themselves, that creative element. And so if they've gone through years of their life really focusing on practical aspects of living, they may have become very established in whatever work they did, but really kind of feel a kind of emptiness. It's time to contemplate what lives inside that has been suppressed or detached or shut down, that's the shadow piece. So, our shadow could be an incredibly beautiful part of ourselves that we just have not integrated. And when we integrate it, we start to feel kind of like life is worth living. It feels so much better. That is not always the truth. Sometimes, we can see, really horrifyingly ugly parts of ourselves that frighten ourselves as well. But it's also good to recognize that, the truth is that, we all have, selfish and greedy and, kind of sometimes angry parts of ourselves that come to the surface as well. And, we may have learned that it is completely and always and in every single case unacceptable for us to be, self-serving or greedy or whatever it is. So for example, you might go through life thinking greed is the worst thing in the world, and as a result, you know living an incredibly impoverished life, and finding yourself in a situation where you can't pay your rent, or you're not eating nutritional food because you think it's selfish to put yourself ahead of others. you know so is greed a bad thing? Well, it's not good or bad. It's how it gets integrated into our lives, and what we do with these things. And if we understand what greed is for us, we may be able to let it unfold in a way that is more meaningful and humane. So knowing if there's greed in the shadow, we're pointing our fingers at other people who are greedy when we're going like, oh my god, I feel so jealous, I wish I could do that too. If that's happening, that's the shadow. So it's the unconscious part, something you're resisting, you don't want to see, you don't want to admit to. You say like, that's not me, I didn't do it, I hate it when other people do it. It's it's seen by yourself as negative, and it's frightening. It can be very frightening to you. So let's take a few moments and listen to a few clips that I've put together that are quite interesting about the shadow.
A shadow, one could say, is simply the dark area produced by some object coming between rays of light and its surface. But for someone like Carl Jung, the shadow signifies a far more literary personification. The shadow is perceived as an entity of its own that is welded and chained within the realm of our deep unconscious mind, a dark specter that we all possess, but also one too frightening for many people to ever build the courage to face. A specter that can never be defeated, but if tamed, can lead to personal cultivation and the evolution of the mind and body. But what is the shadow? According to Jung, the shadow possesses the most inferior characteristics of the psyche that all men try to relinquish. The shadow might be a desire frowned upon by our conscience and peers. It could be a bizarre or unhealthy interest that the powers of civilization have apparently coiled. Shadow contents involve known and unknown aspects of the self, making the ego, the unconscious, and the environment all play a role in its expression or repression. When confronted by the ego, the largely unconscious shadow can be integrated into the consciousness. But for the most part, the shadow lies beyond the threshold of human awareness. It is quite within the possibility for a man to recognize the relative evil of his nature, but it is a rare and shattering experience for him to gaze into the face of absolute evil.
Well, that makes shadows sound absolutely terrifying. And yet, we all have these elements within inside of ourselves. And this is where, we start to really reflect on who are we and what are we really made of? Because we've all had moments, this would be true for everyone, where we have reactions to certain situations. And when we contemplate our own reactions, it terrifies us. And yet, where does that come from? Well, that comes from ourselves. So self-knowledge is a real way to kind of come to it's almost like an internal cleansing or healing, to know ourselves deeply. Dr. Gerald May was a practicing psychiatrist and the author of a book called The Dark Night of the Soul. And the Dark Night of the Soul is actually a term that originated from Christian mystical traditions in the 1600s with Teresa de Avila and Saint John of the Cross. But it was actually an appropriate term to use today to identify an inner experience of transitioning away from that which was meaningful in the past to the shedding of old beliefs into a new, fresh way of looking at our lives. And it can be very, very uncomfortable because you're challenging the ego, your personality structure that you've used for your entire life to get through all the difficulties that you have faced, you know, to bolster yourself up when you need it. So your ego, it's your conscious mind. It's the part of your identity that you consider yourself. Your ego is yourself. So when somebody says, oh, that gal or that guy has a big ego, then you're saying that he or she is, you know, kind of like too full of themselves. And a deeper, authentic connection with a clarity of connection to the world, others, and our spiritual nature, rather than a practical, rational way of looking at ourselves that the ego represents. So it seems to me that many people are actually deeply reflecting on themselves, their lives, their so-called truths and beliefs that have been, you know, driving us for a lifetime, only to start to begin to see that some of these beliefs are outdated constructs that no longer serve. And really, I am just seeing this everywhere with the COVID-19 lockdowns. More of the structured ways of living our lives are being broken down, you know, and we are being forced because of the circumstances at hand to reflect on what and how we've been living our lives, what we value, whether these values are truly in alignment with what's right for us as individuals and as a species. So like, that's a lot to take in. So when we think about it in those terms, we start to recognize that, you know, this shadow can be seen when we start to slow down and really look at our lives from a new perspective. So we can get into a real battle with ourselves when we confront that which is the deepest within us. Now, you know, anyways, this stuff bubbles to the surface constantly. So, you know, we may be really wanting to, you know, work at keeping it under the surface. And you can imagine how much energy that would take. So instead of living your life, you know, as honestly as you can, we spend a lot of our lives pushing down that which we find detestable. And, you know, in a way, it's completely understandable. We're all driven to need to survive. And survival historically has always been connected with fitting into our family values or our social groups. And that's how the shadow, you know, is developed, because we need it to help us, you know, deal with, you know, that which is really complicated. Here is Adrienne Eliopoulos. She is going to talk a little bit about the shadow, and she actually does a really good job of explaining how this starts to happen from a young age.
Yes. Well, basically, whenever you're born, you pretty much know nothing about the world. You don't know how your body works. You don't know how reality works. All you have is basically your urges and instincts, but you don't really have a mental framework or idea about the way reality works. And the shadow always has to do with ideas foremost. So basically, when you're a very, very small child, or more so a baby, you don't have a shadow at all, but it quickly starts to sort of build up as you go. So as you start to identify with things, you learn your name, you learn what you look like, you learn, hey, this is me here, and then the rest of the world is this out here. Oh, or maybe I like carrots, or maybe I don't like carrots. And these little things start to kind of attract around your self-concept. This becomes your identity. Now, whenever you get a really strong bit of identification where you think, oh, maybe I'm a good person, you might repress away all of the traits that you have labeled as bad. Never mind if they actually are bad or not, but if you've labeled them as bad, you start to repress them away. And those aspects of yourself that are in line with what you've considered bad, what you've judged as bad, get relegated to the shadow. So here's an example. My daughter right now is 5 years old, and she really strongly identifies as a girl. And she has this tendency where, she always wants girls to win at everything, and she likes girl movies, and it's all about being a girl. So that's her really, really strong identification. And even though she doesn't hate boys or anything like that, there's a definite aversion to anything that's boy-like. So she might not want to watch a boy movie, as she would call it, or like boy colors, but that doesn't really have anything to do with her true preferences, not really. What it has to do is she now has this idea in her mind that she projects out onto reality that says, boyness is not me, girlness is me. And there becomes this identification there. And then with that identification, the opposite gets repressed away.
So that's a really good explanation of how this starts to develop as we are young, and how, something that could be completely innocuous, can be turned into something very negative from within inside of ourselves. And recognizing that, you've probably heard this from people in your life, they seem to have an idea that something's good, all good, or bad, bad, all bad. And, there's nothing you can say to change their minds. It's not necessarily a rational conversation. It's an emotional feeling. And sometimes it can be a really, really strong feeling. And so, that's often where the shadow is again. So in terms of our growth as people, when we start to uncover our shadow, it's true that we remove some of the burden of our inner battle. And by removing the burden of our inner battle, we are no longer suppressing, elements that, really, there's no need to use that much energy on it. And also we start to see our true nature, and that, it's not always beautiful, but, even things that are not beautiful are certainly better to be dealt with in the light of day, rather than as an unconscious drive that comes out in a fit of rage, or behaviors that we're ashamed of. And just recognizing our deepest, wildest nature and desires can help us honestly see ourselves and decide from a conscious level, how do we want to play that out? Otherwise, sometimes we'll just act from a place of unawareness and just wreak havoc on our lives, behave in ways that are, really, we're ashamed of. We don't really want that in our lives, but, because they can bubble through and catch us off guard because they haven't been integrated, it can cause a tremendous problem. So we've all known people who seem to be unaware of their behaviors, and how their behaviors impact those around them. And this is like the unconscious drives pushing through without any self-awareness. And when this happens, what we're seeing is that an individual's inner nature, their shadow, has not been integrated, and they cannot even stand to have anybody point out that what they're doing and how they're behaving is it's not okay. And if we know, like I know, I can get irritable sometimes. Let's say if I have to wait, I've got a thing about waiting. I'm actually doing better with that now, probably because I've had to wait in a lot of lines since COVID-19. But I know that I've had this thing about waiting in lines. And deep within me, if I sense that waiting in lines is dangerous or represents maybe a lack of importance, maybe that feels threatening to me or something like that, then maybe I would become impatient, lose my temper, become angry, even at people who I value. And then I'd be jeopardizing my relationships when really that's not what I want to do. And if I start to own that, yeah, do you know what? I can get irritable sometimes. And then I can notice the irritation and I can feel it and tend to it. in a way that will allow me to actually, be more integrated in my approach. So this is another email, and this is from Monique in Whitehorse, Yukon. Well, hello, Monique, and welcome to Bear Psychology. Monique says she's a first-time listener, and she's glad. She says, I am glad that you are healthy. Some people's shadows are their entire life sometimes. Are shadows that are bad a way to change one's behavior when brought to one's attention? Well, that is a great question, Monique. And that's exactly what I'm suggesting, that not only is it helpful when, if you have a trusted person saying, I noticed something, and they're willing to tell you what they think it is, and you can accept it and start to contemplate what it is, that can be a wonderful way of integrating shadow, seeing yourself more honestly. And, I have some friends in my life who are really willing to tell me what they think. We have honest conversations. They tell me what they think of me. And, sometimes I am, just as fallible as anybody else. So, they will tell me if they think something's off, or if I need to hear something, they'll tell me what they want to say, because we have this honest dialogue. And sometimes I hear things that I don't always like. And I really try to take it on board, because I'm as dedicated to my own growth as I am to the growth of anybody that I work with or speak with. Because I think in terms of our lives, what are we doing here if not growing? I just think it's very valuable, very important. So now I want to talk a little bit about Dr. Jordan Peterson. He's the University of Toronto psychology professor who shot to fame after aligning with strongly held beliefs of a very controversial nature. And he actually, does a really eloquent job of speaking about the shadow. But he's also spent a lot of time arguing that there's an ongoing crisis of masculinity and a backlash against masculinity, and that masculine spirit is under assault. And he's suggested that there be a defunding of women's studies. And anyways, he goes on. He's got many, many controversial ideas. But in the spirit of looking with open eyes, he does this really excellent job of focusing on the problems of integrating the shadow. And, it's really interesting to hear his particular perspective. He had studied Jung. That was a big part.
The first thing you have to understand with regards to trying to come to terms with the conception of the shadow is to understand the idea of persona. And persona is the you that you present when you want people to accept and like you. Often let's say that you go to a party and you're trying to impress the people that are there, and you're trying to get them to like you. And so you maybe get jabbed out a little bit, and you laugh, and you go along with everyone so that they like you. And then you go home and you're bitterly resentful about the way that you were put down at this party. And that's going to make all sorts of aggressive, I wish I could have said, it's going to make all sorts of aggressive and vengeful thoughts sort of flash through your imagination. Well, the first part of the problem is that you were too much persona, right? You sacrificed yourself in some sense at the party so that people would like you. And in the second part, you're refusing to admit to the existence of those elements of you that would have actually protected you from doing that. So let's say you go home and you're all bitter and resentful, and you have fantasies of revenge. I mean, that reveals to you the shadow part of you that's aggressive. And the thing is, you actually need that, because if you would have integrated that more successfully into your personality, when you went to the party, you wouldn't have had to let people put you down to get them to like you. Instead of having a face like this, which says, I'll take anything that's coming my way, you have a face and a stance that's more determined and assertive. And if you manifest that properly, people aren't going to mess with you to begin with. But you may have already adopted a morality that says, well, I have to be likable and I shouldn't do anything that causes any conflict and I shouldn't ever, hurt anybody's feelings. And so you're just to present yourself as a punching bag, and you think that that makes you a good person, but it doesn't. And there's no integration of the shadow in that situation.
So he's talking about integration of the shadow, and it's a really interesting video. It goes on. There's a 2017 February the 8th posting on YouTube where he talks about integrating your shadow, and he reflects on Jung's work as well, because that's really the basis for a lot of this work. Now, interestingly, in late 2016, Peterson went on a strict diet consisting of only meat and some vegetables to control severe depression and an autoimmune disorder, including psoriasis. And by mid 2018, he stopped eating vegetables, he continued eating beef. And then there is this period of really unfortunate unfolding in Peterson's story. Now, remember, he is very well known for his work, his books, his lectures. He's a figure in the world at this time. So, he has this unfortunate situation with his wife who develops cancer, and from what I can see and read, he really adores his spouse, and this is very distressing. He went silent for a period of time. In 2019, he went into a rehab facility after experiencing symptoms of physical withdrawal when he stopped taking clonazepam, which is an anxiolytic. It's an anti-anxiety medication. He'd been taking that drug on his doctor's recommendations following his wife's cancer diagnosis. And apparently he was then taken into a medically induced coma at a clinic in Russia in order to get off of the clonazepam, which apparently he was having a terribly desperate time dealing with. And I understand now that he is recovering, but it seems to me that he is on his own hero's journey, that that he himself is trying to find a way to struggle with whatever is going on for him as well, on a very deep level. This man who was such a strong and verbal speaker is absolutely devastated emotionally and psychologically, and to the point where he was needing medication to manage all of his symptoms. So clearly he has been really suffering, this man, and yet this is the same person who has written this self-help guide book with the proponent of no one gets away with anything ever, so take responsibility for your life, in his best-selling self-help book, 12 Rules for Life. That's the main focus of the book. Now, his daughter, Michaela, said that he nearly died several times during this whole medical ordeal, after weeks of intensive care, on serious medications, that he needed to go into this drug-induced coma in Russia. And Michaela, his daughter, was very consistent and emphatic in explaining in a YouTube video that her father was suffering only from physical dependence and not addiction to the medication he was on. She was very, very, she wanted people to be clear about this point for some reason, that I guess she really felt it would be awful for anybody to imagine that her father, who was so strong, had become dependent on medication. So I do wish Dr. Peterson an ease back into full recovery. But let's look even more closely about what might be happening when someone who is so strong on the outside may have these vulnerabilities and fragilities deep within, but they cannot stand for any of this to come to the surface, for them to feel that vulnerability, that pain and suffering. Like imagine, your spouse of, I don't know how many years, 30 something years he was married to this woman, is diagnosed with cancer, and he's devastated and dedicated to her. What would his hero's journey look like of deepening his own self-understanding? And I wonder how he will emerge after this unprecedented ordeal. Is it a furthering of his own uncovering of shadow, his own individuation? And, will he have a more open-hearted response to those who struggle with their own inner demons on this difficult life journey? Because life is challenging. My God, the things that we face can be so heart-wrenching at times. And, we have to leave space for the softness in our life. So, this is from Lindsay. This is another email from Lindsay, and she says, I find that when someone is becoming dysregulated, so that's like emotionally overwrought or out of control with their emotions. So Lindsay's saying, I find that when someone is becoming dysregulated or falls into their shadow, I find it challenging not to follow. And Lindsay says, advice, question. And I think that's actually an excellent question, Lindsay, because I think what you're doing is exactly correct. You're looking at yourself and realizing that you, on some level, cannot stop yourself from following that person into dysregulation. So it may not be so much that you cannot keep yourself regulated, but that you cannot tolerate leaving somebody who is dysregulated alone. Like, it's almost like you're telling me you are taking responsibility and ownership over somebody's emotions. And then it makes me ask, Lindsay, in your life, as you were growing up, when you were vulnerable at other times, were there people who you felt you needed to show up for, to put all of your needs and even your well-being aside for, when they were losing control of their emotions? So this may be a place where your shadow comes, where it was safer for you to align completely with somebody who was emotionally out of control because it was safer, rather than recognizing you are two separate people, and it is perfectly okay for them to play out their pain, their emotions, bear witness, be kind, but it does not need to be your story. It is their story. So, I think that's really, it's a really, really important thing to just reflect. What is that for us? When we notice that we are struggling with somebody else's emotions, right? Okay, so this is from Peter. Hi, Peter. Hello, doctor. Have you ever heard of Dr. Gustav Jung? He did a lot of research on the subject in the 50s and 60s. Well, actually, Carl Jung is Carl Gustav Jung. And Carl Gustav Jung was born in July of 1875 and lived through to June of 1961. He was a Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, and he is the same fellow I think we are both reflecting on right now. So yeah, he did a lot of work in this area, and that's the same guy I'm pretty sure that that you're referencing. And you are right, he did just the most remarkable, he had great insight into this very issue. So this is from Ron, and Ron says, love the show today. This topic really needs to be taught in high school. I think that it would definitely help our young people chart the course of their lives for the better. Thank you so much, Ron. I actually think you're onto something. I think that, young people have an incredibly strong desire to learn and to know themselves. And when they're given an opportunity to reflect, wisdom can really come to the forefront at an early age. So on a more positive aspect, of that which is deep within us. I want to also consider the work of Dr. May again. So Dr. Gerald May's book, The Awakened Heart, he states that there is a desire within each of us in the deep center of ourselves that we call our heart. We're born with it. It's never completely satisfied and it never dies. And we're often unaware of it, but it is always awake. It is the human desire for love. And every person on this earth yearns to love. Every person on this earth yearns to love, to be loved, to know love. And our true identity, our reason for being, is to be found in this desire. And May goes on to state that you can find evidence of this longing in great art, music, literature, religions. A common universal passion for love runs through them all. And psychology offers evidence as well. The passion for love can be found at the core of human motivation. There's even evidence in neurology. The researchers Paul MacLean says that the highly developed human cerebral cortex makes possible the insight required to plan for the needs of others and gives us a concern for all living things. And what is true is that we are so much more than our titles, our jobs, our degrees, what we own, who we know. And instead, Dr. May suggests that we can find our way to our truer self through self-reflection or contemplation. And he provides an excellent description. Contrary to popular understanding, contemplation does not imply quietness or withdrawal. To be clear, from his perspective, what Dr. May is suggesting is not simply something like meditation. It's actually beyond meditation and more of a pure medium of being with whatever is arising. And, it's kind of being in presence with yourself so that, you are really with the moment that is occurring. So Dr. May gives an example of that, and he says that one person described perfect presence when there was a fire in this woman's house, and she acted immediately to take care of her family and call for help. And she, the woman, says she never felt so alive, and until or after it was all over, there was no fear, none at all. And another woman described the same thing during childbirth. A man told of contemplative presence that happened spontaneously while waiting for a flight in an airport. The flight was delayed. The man says, normally I would have been restless, but for some reason, in some strange way, I was just there with all the people in their joys of reunion and griefs of separation, with the real lives of the airline personnel, even with the truck sand trees outside the windows and a person making announcements on the public display address. And, this is a time when shadow is not operating, when you can have those perfect presence moments. And sometimes they happen in crisis, excitement, great activity, or simple appreciation. But you know that in those moments, the shadow is not driving you. So when you integrate the shadow, you can live with more simplicity, more honestly, in a greater sense of integration. And it just frees us up. So we want to definitely find ways to do that, to free ourselves up. Now, this one is from Lisa, and Lisa says, does the shadow drive you to do things? Anger is part of my shadow, and I know this because of my enormous response to something that angered me, people encroaching on baby wild animals in an unprotected area. Even though the animals were unharmed, my response was gigantic. I was angry, I yelled at people, and then when they went away, I was in tears, but I think not because of the animals, but because at my own shock, at my angry response. I never yell. Yet even though I did something about this to help, I reported this to the officials taking care of animals who are now monitoring and taking care of the situation. I find it so hard to let go. I want to go back constantly to check on the animals. I know when the area gets busy, I know that this will ignite the anger and upset me. This actually, anger may be part of this, but I think there may be other elements. So we don't want to get too focused on just one emotion, but recognize that, we are super complex as human beings. So we may need to take a little bit more time and kind of reflect on even vulnerability. Because if we have this feeling of harm and something happening that is out of our control, because that's what I'm hearing in this email as well, you know, we may need to just slow down, because there might be more than one layer. So we're going to stop this radio show first, and I want to give you some little tips to take home with you. I want you to just think about a time, like Lisa did, when you lost it. You flew off the handle. You did something that was out of character, and maybe you didn't like it. And I want you just for a moment, just give yourself time to contemplate what was going on in that moment. And when you do, silence is where I want you to stay. So just allow yourself to be with that, with no distractions. Sit in the silence and let whatever it is, the fear, the vulnerability, the doubts, let them surface. Sit with the emotions. Just let them be there. You might have some thoughts. You might have some like really primal feelings inside of you. Allow yourself to be with it without avoiding it. Notice if you're trying to avoid it. Notice if you're trying to distract yourself. And then just write out everything that you can think of. You know, kind of do a stream of consciousness writing. And sometimes I personally prefer to write on paper. I just find there's something more revealing with the act of writing on paper for me. If you find you could do it on a computer or a tablet or whatever, that's great. But I like to get a book that is just, this is the book that I'm doing this project on. If this is your shadow book, then make it your shadow book, and just allow yourself to write out everything that comes to the surface. And allow yourself, if you need to work with a therapist, people who are listening in, fabulous. Find somebody who's willing to do that deeper work with you. Listen, once you've had a chance to write out everything in your mind, start to read it back. Get in a very calm state. Maybe do a little meditation, maybe do a self-compassion meditation or a loving kindness meditation. There's divine light meditations that are really beautiful. You can find all this stuff online, and then read your shadow back. Read your shadow back and be accepting. And I have 4 questions to give you. Why are you doing this to me? So you're going to be talking to your own emotion, your own shadow. Why are you doing this to me? And then spend some time writing out your response, whatever it is. It doesn't matter. This is about learning and growing. It's not about nailing down the answer. That's not the goal. The next one is, what do you want from me? So again, you're talking to your shadow. You're talking to your shadow. You're talking to the strong emotion that's surfacing. Then, what are you trying to show me? Allow yourself to let this come to the surface as honestly as you can. And then finally, what do you have to teach me? And use that shadow book to help you work with this content. And, really just give yourself some time to kind of learn and think and understand, and, allow yourself to just be gentle and curious with yourself. I mean, to me, one of the most important things is allowing yourself to have, a really honest integration of what is coming to the surface, because all of a sudden you can have just so much insight into things that have really troubled you in your lifetime that you haven't wanted to really come to terms with. And, when you give yourself the time to accept who you are, you can start being who you really, really need to be in this life. And you know what? We need you here. We need you, the authentic you, to come and be part of this complicated world. So Carl Jung says as far as we discern, the sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of mere being. It's pretty beautiful when you think about it. So I hope that all of you will give yourself a chance to contemplate the shadow, to reflect on this, what it means for you. There's loads and loads of resources. Carl Jung's Red Book is really interesting if people want something that is deeper. I wish all of you a gentle day. Take care of yourself and hopefully allow yourself to know yourself even better.
Thank you for listening to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with psychologist, author, and speaker, Dr. Anna Baranowski, right here on Reality Radio 101.